The story you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts featuring historical characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was an American serial killer known as the Kansas City Butcher and the Collector who kidnapped, raped, tortured, and murdered at least 6 men between 1984 and 1987 in Kansas City, Missouri, after having forced his victims to endure periods of up to 6 weeks of captivity. In 1949, Berdella was born into a Catholic family, and his father was a die-setter at the Ford Motor Company while his mother stayed at home. Berdella suffered from severe nearsightedness, and so at the age of 5, was given thick glasses to wear. Berdella did well at school, although his teachers had difficulty teaching him. From a young age, Robert Berdella was a loner. With his severe nearsightedness, high blood pressure, and speech impediment, he was an easy target for bullies in his neighborhood. This included his father, who would physically and verbally abuse the young boy for his lack of athleticism. His father died suddenly at the age of 39 when Berdella was 16 years old. By his mid-teens, Berdella had begun to gain some confidence. He had realized that he was gay, and though he kept this a closely guarded secret, it gave him a level of self-assurance. Not long afterwards, his mother remarried, which made Berdella angry and resentful. Around this time, Berdella had been working at a local restaurant, and he claimed later that he had been sexually assaulted by one of his male co-workers. In 1967, Berdella began studying at the Kansas City Art Institute. In college, he was finally able to express himself and was open with his homosexuality. He had hoped to become a professor, and during his time at the institute, he began torturing animals, including a dog, chicken, and duck. It was also at this time that he began selling drugs and drinking alcohol. And when he was 19, he was arrested for possession of marijuana and LSD. Luckily for Berdella, he was released 5 days later as there wasn't enough evidence. After he received harsh backlash from the administration of the institute for an art piece where he tortured, killed, and cooked a duck, Berdella left college and moved into a house in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Kansas City. Using the contacts he made through his extensive pen pal relationships from his lonely childhood, as well as his knowledge of art, Berdella opened a store called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, where he sold art, jewelry, and antiques from around the world. Throughout the 1970s and early 80s, Berdella spent much of his time with male prostitutes, drug addicts, petty criminals, and runaways that he claimed to be mentoring. In reality, he was engaging in manipulative sexual relationships with young men. In July 5, 1984, Berdella drugged his friend Jerry Howell, a son of one of Berdella's acquaintances from his art dealings business. He offered to drive him to a dance competition at a neighboring town. On the way, Robert Berdella plied the youth with alcohol and then drugged him with Valium and acepromazine. He tied Howell to his bed for 28 hours, during which he repeatedly drugged, tortured, raped, and violated the youth with foreign objects. Ignoring his desperate pleas for Berdella to stop, he continued his torture until Howell finally asphyxiated from a combination of his gag, the drugs, and his own vomit. After Howell died, Berdella butchered his body, leaving the corpse upside down overnight with cuts in major arteries to drain the blood, and then dismembering the body with a bone saw. He then placed the pieces of the dismembered body in separate garbage bags along with assorted other trash and left them out on the curb for garbage men to take away. Less than a year later, Berdella drugged 23-year-old Robert Sheldon, a drifter whom he had taken care of and exploited for years. On April 10, 1985, he knocked on his door and begged Berdella to let him stay there. Berdella was not attracted to Sheldon, and though he did not rape him, he did restrain and torture him. With Sheldon, Berdella began his experiments on using chemicals to weaken his victims, leaving them helpless to his machinations. He bound Sheldon's wrists with piano wire in an attempt to permanently damage the nerves there, put drain cleaner in his eyes, and filled his ears with caulk. He also placed needles under Sheldon's fingernails. When workmen were scheduled to come to Bob Berdella's house, he decided to suffocate Sheldon and dissected his corpse before disposing of it. Berdella found Mark Wallace hiding in his shed during a storm in June and invited him to shelter inside his house. Berdella drugged Wallace and subjected him to high-voltage electrical shocks and stuck hypodermic needles into his back. Wallace died after a few days of this unrelenting torture, and his body was also dismembered and disposed of. The next month, another of Berdella's acquaintances contacted him wondering if he could stay at his house, Walter James Ferris. When Ferris arrived at Berdella's house, he tied him to his bed and tortured him by shocking his genitals with 7,700 volts of electricity for 2 days until he died from the abuse. In June 1986, male prostitute Todd Stoops was lured back to Berdella's house, which wasn't difficult because they had known each other for a while. He attempted to turn Stoops into a submissive sex slave, trying to incapacitate him through electrical shocks to the eyes and by injecting drain cleaner into his larynx in an unsuccessful effort to render him mute, while repeatedly raping and sexually assaulting him. Stoops eventually died of blood loss after his anal cavity was ruptured by Berdella's fist. In 1987, Berdella continued his attempt with 20-year-old Larry Wayne Pearson, an acquaintance he made while working at his shop. Berdella decided to kill him after Pearson jokingly referred to his practice of robbing gay men in Wichita. He dragged Pearson and continued his torture practices, aimed at incapacitating his victims, binding, electric shocking, and injecting drain cleaner into his larynx. He also broke one of Pearson's hands with a metal bar. After 6 weeks of rape and torture, Pearson finally snapped and beat deeply into Berdella's penis during an act of forced fellatio. Berdella then beat and strangled Pearson to death. The last known victim of Berdella was Grace Bryson, a prostitute who was abducted in March 1988. Although he too had been locked in the basement, he managed to escape by leaping from the second-story window where he was being held as a captive and ran to a nearby meter maid who called the police. On April 2, 1988, Berdella was arrested. When his home was searched, officers discovered written logs of the torture Berdella had inflicted on 6 young men from around the areas and vast numbers of Polaroid photographs of them. Berdella had kept 2 skulls buried in his backyard for a while, then dug them up and placed them in a closet with the teeth in envelopes nearby. When they ventured into the basement, they found large barrels stained with blood, as well as the personal belongings of 2 missing people and a stack of Polaroid photos depicting naked men being sexually assaulted and tortured. All of his victims had been dismembered, put into trash bags, and left on the curb for the trash collectors to take to the local landfill. Because of this, the bodies of his victims were never located. Without the bodies as evidence, it was going to be very difficult for the prosecution to get a guilty verdict in court. Therefore, they made a deal with Berdella that if he confessed to his crimes and gave the details of each murder, they would not seek the death penalty. He would only receive a life sentence. Berdella, unaware that there was an issue of lack of evidence, agreed to the deal and pleaded guilty after confessing. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 1992, Berdella had written letters to a minister where he claimed the prison officials were preventing him from receiving his heart medicine. He died of a heart attack while incarcerated at the Missouri State Penitentiary on October 8, 1992, at the age of 43. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twisted Mind, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!